The truth will set you free. The truth will set you free.
Well, I'm going to do something a little bit different from the normal Bible study weekly content that I, produce for this part of the channel, the podcast. I was asked to be on a panel for a women's, specifically a mom's group at our church that meets once a week. I was asked to be on a panel of husbands to just answer some questions that were on their minds as young moms in particular. And since that took some of my time that I would normally use for other things and work and prep and stuff like that, I thought, I could actually double dip this because there's a lot here that I could just apply to sharing stuff about my life as a dad and a husband and navigating that as a Christian with, I don't want to say geek temperament, but just things that tend to be true of many geeks. And so I didn't really bring the geek application into my responses at the panel, which we just recorded this morning as I'm recording this now. But I thought there's a lot that could really transfer over. And even if you're not married and don't have kids, there's a lot here that is relevant to just navigating relationships in general in life. We've been going through studying the book of Proverbs in our weekly Bible study series. And so I just thought that in a number of ways, this kind of could slot in pretty well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the questions I was given in advance and the notes that I prepared to take with me, and just kind of share some thoughts and responses to these things. The first one was just kind of a fun, light question. If you are a grandpa, what is your grandpa name? And if you aren't, what do you want your grandpa name to be? Well, my boys are 13 and 16. We're a good ways off, I think, from me being a grandpa. I'd probably say grandpa, or maybe, I don't know, papa or something. Papa doesn't sound right. I think, though, whatever comes out of their mouths is just what I'm going to like. Just whatever cute little thing that stumbles across their lips, I'll say, okay, that's what I am. What was your first fight as a married couple? My wife Holly and I have been married for over 22 years now. And so I had to search back in my memory quite a bit. I don't remember the details. Holly and I don't fight verbally. I mean, we don't really fight in the traditional sense that I think of that word, or even argue. What really happens is we wrong each other in some way, or fall short in some way, and then there's some kind of a tension or an emotional response to that we notice. Maybe it's kind of subtle and under the radar, but one or both of us will notice that, and then one of us will approach the other, whoever gets to it first, to talk about it and resolve, what happened and what we're feeling about it. But this one, the first year we had maybe some things that were more closer to actual fights. And this one had to do with running late to church. I was singing a solo that morning, and from my background, you get to the rehearsal prepared and on time. You are not late, and that was a value of mine. And a value of hers was that we go to church together, even though we could just as easily arrive separately. We have two different cars. That'd be no problem. I didn't know that it was an important thing in her mind that we go to church together. We drive home together. And so when she was kind of running behind in her preparation, I was like, okay, I'll just take the other car and I'll see you when I get there. And I didn't realize until I said that, and her reaction to it, like, oh my gosh, this is a thing. And so we just hadn't shared we hadn't even thought to share our expectations of what we were valuing and the applicability it was going to have to that situation. And we didn't have time to talk about it either because I was on a timetable. And so that was a difficult thing, but it really had to do with expectations. And I think that's so much of what relationships are about, especially as they become deeper, certainly in the case of marriage and family relationships. Putting expectations on the table that we maybe assume another person also has or shares with us, but they actually might not. And so just kind of checking in, so this is what I'm thinking about this. This has kind of been a value for me in the past. Is that's the same for you? Having those kinds of moments, asking those kinds of questions over time has just been huge. But it made things difficult early on when we didn't know to do that. How can we approach a conversation when our husbands are not being the spiritual leader? Now, different strands of Christianity are going to treat the idea of male headship or spiritual leadership coming from the husband differently. My background, my view on that is that yes, the man is meant to be ultimately responsible for the spiritual growth and the leadership of the family. However, not in any kind of remotely dominating way. He is very dependent on his wife, and she is going to have a perspective on things that he won't, and that he's going to suffer if he doesn't ask her about or hear from her about. And so it is absolutely vital that that leading really is done together, and there should be very, very few exceptions, to them coming to a place where they don't agree. The idea is we talk about it, we agree. So anyway, how can we approach a conversation when our husbands are not being the spiritual leader? Holly asks for help. She never scolds me. She respects and affirms my strengths and expresses maybe a need or a desire in light of them. So recognizing, you are so good at this, and I'm feeling this going on, and I would love for this to be this way instead of this way or whatever. And I just see that you are whatever she wants to share that she would see as like a helpful solution or something that could bring about a positive outcome. She really comes across as like almost kind of humbly petitioning instead of entitled or demanding. She's never entitled or demanding in the way she kind of calls me up. I see her need as she shares it. I see my shortcoming, which of course is difficult, but I also see in the way she communicates a chance to be the rescuer. And as a comic book nerd, of course, I love that idea, but I think a lot of men in general like the idea of being someone that can bring rescue into a situation. So it's not her wagging finger and her unmet expectations that are being communicated to me. In her approach, she makes me want to be what I can be to help, what can bring rescue. And she affirms my ability to bring good to a situation. And I think this is so applicable to any kind of calling up that we do in any situation that I can think of, at least right now. I think a lot of times, particularly geeks online, can sort of call up other Christians with what feels like in their wording and in their tone, which is hard to control, and we need to be more aware of that, I think, as geeks online, when you're communicating through text. It comes across as a wagging finger. You should do this, you should do that, when affirmation followed by questions are much more persuasive, much more effective. And I think that oftentimes we fail to incorporate what is actually going to help us come across most effectively. Instead, we're just focused on, Scripture says iron sharpens iron. We're supposed to call each other up, exhort each other. We're supposed to do these kinds of things. But then they skip all the details that Scripture gives about how we can be persuasive, how we can actually win over someone through the way that we communicate. All that tends to be forgotten. And those are such vital pieces of wisdom in Scripture that we need to increasingly learn to apply if we don't want to just deliver the message, but we actually want to be effective in how we are calling each other up. So my wife has just been wonderful at that. What is the best way/time to bring up differences? Well, and again, another thing that really applies to all kinds of relationships, situations, in online interactions. The time is that there's no good time, in my experience. Holly and I have a weekly kind of connection date that's been useful to us. Otherwise, just any time where things are settled at home. I think as a geek, I've had to learn to hold loosely to my hobbies that I might be engaged with on an evening, because my wife at any moment, I learned years ago, and it was hard to learn this, but at any moment she might come in, something's been weighing on her mind, and she really wants to talk to me about it. I need to be ready to instantly drop what I'm doing and give her my full attention. And we've kind of met each other halfway. I think I really had to learn to, first off, give her my full attention instead of just assuming it would be something we could talk about while I continue playing. And then I think she's also had to understand the nature of video games and some of the ones that I play, that like, I can't always pause if it's the middle of a cutscene. If she just, usually she realizes if she can wait 30 seconds, maybe 60 seconds at the most, I'll be at a point where I can pause, and then I give her my full attention. And so that's my gaming, and the way I was approaching my gaming and my interactions with Holly in the first, 5 to 10 years of our marriage, was hurting her, and so that's something that I really had to learn. But so there's no good time. We just have to try and figure the least bad time to bring stuff up. But as far as the way of doing it, and again, this applies to all kinds of relationships, all kinds of online communication, genuinely wondering if you might be wrong or have missed something. This is something that I've really tried to bring to my communication with people, with my wife. Even if I think that I am absolutely right, asking myself, but is it possible, maybe not likely, but is it at least possible that I've missed something? And the answer to that is always yes. It is always at least remotely possible that we have missed something. There's something we don't understand, and we are being too quick to come to a conclusion about the thing that we want to bring up or the thing that we want to talk about that we see differently than the person we're talking to. And so I think getting to that place where you recognize, you know what, the broken clock I'm talking to is only right twice a day. That might be your attitude. But then realizing, you know what, maybe this is their big moment. Maybe this is their moment and I've missed something. And getting to a place first, before we come to the other person, getting to a place first where we're actually genuinely curious, could I have missed something? And then bringing that more humble attitude to the interaction and saying, what do you think about this? You know, I wonder if fill in the blank. And then after they kind of maybe respond to that, you can follow up with, do you have any concern that, you know, this might be the case or that this might be the perception or whatever? And if you still can't get there, then to still humbly acknowledge that maybe there's something that you just haven't heard yet, and say, I have trouble getting there in my mind because, and then explain, you know, what you're having trouble with. And I think even if you end the conversation and that's the strength of your wording there, you have still communicated why you disagree and the fact that you disagree and the reasons for your disagreeing. And so even if you guys don't come to agreement, the way you handle that interaction can have so much effect on later on how they think about it and process it. And they might come to a place, as I have, as my wife has, where because of the way an interaction was handled, even though we didn't come to agreement, we expressed where we were at with humility, and then we let the conversation end, you know, and thought about it some more or whatever. And sometimes one of us will come back and say, you know, yeah, I think you're right, you know, or I think this much of what you said is right that I wasn't saying, you know, agreeing with before, you know. So I think that's so huge. That's so huge to have that genuine humility in our minds before we bring some kind of word of differences in our view on things, or if it needs to be a confrontation about something. What does your wife do that feeds your soul, encourages you, helps you step into your role as spiritual leader? She affirms my strengths or character qualities verbally near the context when she really feels it or means it. So maybe she's seen an example of it as I'm interacting with people, we're in a group setting. Then on the drive home from wherever that is, or soon after that, she'll say, wow, I just am amazed at this aspect of how you're wired. Or because maybe it's a more natural thing that I didn't develop, you know, or maybe it is something that I did develop over the years that she just sees and admires, and so she validates the goodness of that aspect of my behavior, my wiring, my tendencies, my love language, as it were. If you haven't heard, there's a book been out for many, many years called The 5 Love Languages. I believe it's written by a Christian, but not like for a Christian audience. Anyway, whatever their background, the content is really helpful to understand, okay, how does a person best receive love, receive encouragement? For some people, encouraging words are a big deal. For other people, it's not. It's an act of service toward them, or it's a gift, you know, or it's just being with them, having quality time with them that really makes them feel like this person loves me, you know, and that's different for everybody. Mine is usually words of affirmation. And so that's been really valuable for me from my wife to just have my soul fed, to be encouraged. As you're in relationships with people, whether it's friendships or family relationships, figuring out what makes them feel really loved and cared about, that can be such a cool thing for your friendship with them, your relationship, whatever the nature of it is, for your ability to speak into their lives. It's really something to me when I see people interacting with others or people interacting with me online, and they just have no idea how their words are coming across and how ineffective and off-putting their words are because they don't know me, which is one reason to ask ourselves, is really, this is online the place to do this? Maybe I just need to look for places to speak into people's lives that I know in person. I think that's much more where the Lord wants us to be. But anyway, and by this, I don't mean that she simply appeals to my insecurity. Many of us geeks are insecure and have an unhealthy attachment to our ego being fed, and we otherwise are insecure apart from that. So I'm not talking about just feeding ego, gushing exuberant praise, but no, soberly expressing gratitude and appreciation for the strengths of someone. In this case, my wife expressing those things to me, affirming those strengths and the actions that I take. That's a really big deal. It's a really big deal. What spiritual disciplines or habits helped strengthen your marriage? How did you implement them? The biggest one for us was, in addition to, just each having our individual times with the Lord, so that we're both individually growing independent of each other, having a weekly connection date. We've done this since before we had kids. Very early on in our marriage, we started a weekly date. The focus wasn't romance, although we certainly had romance in those dates, those lunch dates. We still do. But it's also a time to just connect about what we've been thinking about, what we've been processing. Early on, we read books together that were about marriage, or about just basic doctrines of the Christian faith, but really short chapters, easy to read. So we had to have a springboard to talk about, this is how I was raised. This is the school of thought I come from. This is maybe where we differ from each other. This is maybe where we differ from the author. But just a springboard to kind of talk about what we think about different things. So vital, so important. I mean, that's something that you can do while you're dating before you get married. That's even a better place to do it, books on marriage. And then after doing that for a few years, we stopped doing that because we found that experience helped us to ask the right questions and explore the right topics and share the things with each other during those lunches that were really going to help us to connect, to grow together, to be encouraged, for that to be a life-giving time, a restorative time if that's what's needed. So that weekly scheduled intentional time, some couples will just go on walks or something, on some kind of regular basis. But for us, that weekly lunch has been what works really well for us. Let's see here. How do you and your spouse navigate marital conflict between each other? Again, something relevant to all kinds of relationships. We don't fight or argue really, but instead we try to sense and anticipate hurt or our own wrongdoing and initiate apology and conversation about it. Now, that's how it's been for a number of years, but earlier in our marriage, we had to alert each other as to when we had been hurt or when the other was kind of falling short in something that we were expecting from them. And so it is harder at that time to say, when we were talking earlier and you said this, that made me feel this way or whatever. To have those conversations is so important, and to really listen. Not just kind of like, I remember when we had marriage counseling, and this is, man, I wish everybody that types on anything on the internet would do this. But when we had marriage counseling, they had us sit knee to knee, and the pastor asked Holly to say something. I can't remember what he asked her to say, something about something that's true of her or whatever. And then he asked me to tell her what I heard her say. And I said, "Oh, so you mean in my own words?" And he's like, "No, just say back to her what she said to you." And it was really something, because I'm such a creative, independent thinker type person that I was like, "Oh, so you want me to actually say exactly what she said as much as I can recall it." And it was an exercise in actually listening. And I can't tell you, I'm sure you've experienced this as well, whether you've done content creation or you've just posted something that somebody responded to, and they respond in a way that you're like, did you read what I just wrote? Did you watch the whole video I just put up? Because it seems like you didn't, because the exact thing you're talking about, I addressed. And so this listening, whether it's literally listening to someone talking or actually reading what they wrote in its entirety and really processing. That's so vital. I had one interaction with a person years ago, an ongoing interaction, and it just seemed to me that what I wrote, she, I think, was reading the whole thing, but certain things were just standing out to her as if I delivered them in all caps via megaphone or something, and then other parts she seemed to be completely missing. And so that's why it's so important to really give weight to everything and not just let those things that are hot button issues stand out and drown out everything else we heard, but to really take in everything that someone is saying to us in person, everything that someone has that is in a video or in their comment or whatever that we're interacting with. It's so important to really take all of that in. And then, as far as like navigating conflict, I really try to look for the 1% that I am at fault for. I say 1% and I put that in quotes because I know I'm at fault for more than 1%. But in the moment, it's so easy for us to feel like, well, yeah, okay, so maybe I had a teeny tiny little part that I played that was not good. But them, they did. But to really zero in, okay, what's that teeny tiny part that shouldn't be a problem, but I guess it kind of is. I guess wasn't perfect. And that's the thing. I need to reflect on the perfection and sacrifice of Jesus to find my regret. The degree to which he died to self, the way he lived his life perfectly, giving up what he desired, what he was actually entitled to. He gave that up in the way that he lived his life. And so there was a point in when our boys were very young that was just like the great breaking for me as I think about my life and my spiritual development, where Holly was trying to help me see some areas that I was falling short in as a dad. And I just felt entitled. And I felt like, well, I know I'm better than most dads or whatever. I mean, that's the kind of the attitude I had in my mind. Not even able to say that truthfully, I think. But I was just comparing myself to other people. And what I needed to do was compare myself to Christ, because that is the standard that God holds us to, the standard of perfection, which is, by the way, why we so ridiculously and desperately need the sacrifice of Jesus. Otherwise, we are just not compatible. We are not up for spending eternity in the presence of an absolutely perfect, holy God. So it's getting to that headspace, reflecting on the perfection of Jesus, that helps that 1%, as it starts out in my mind, grow and swell and actually get closer to its actual percentage number, which is going to be much bigger. And discover in that my regret. And then out of that space, out of that genuine heart attitude, go to my wife and apologize. And I think every time that I've done that, that leads to some kind of confession or apology from her as well. Though I resolve for that not to be my motive. Restoration is the motive. I'm not playing a social game to try and get her to apologize by giving her a fake apology. The motive has to be, but I've been there. I've done that. But I've really made it my desire to have restoration as my motive and bring humility into that process as I prepare for that. It's where geek insecurity needs to meet grace for realsies, not just as an academic or theoretical concept, but in the laboratory of life, realize, oh crap, I really need the tireless mercy, grace, forgiveness of Jesus, because I'm a mess. And recognizing that's huge. That's huge. And it's freeing too. There's a burden lifted when you don't feel like you have to keep convincing yourself that you're better than you are. When you actually have this amazing safety net of forgiveness to fall back on in Jesus. It's everything. If you would like some help finding a good church in your area, I would love to help you do that if I can. Online resources and communities are good supplements, but by their very nature, they can't speak to your particular situation like relationships in a local church can. The context for almost everything in the New Testament assumes that we are serving and building purposeful relationships in a local church. So whether you're in a church that lacks Bible-based intentionality or maybe not attending any church at all right now, if I can help you get connected to an authentic, compassionate, Bible-oriented church, I would love to do that. Email me, please, paeter@spiritblade.com, and we can try to look at some websites of churches in your area together.